Hello, my name is Don Osler, and welcome to the January presentation of the Carolina Nature Coalition titled 2021 Federal and State Environmental Policy Discussion. The Carolina Nature Coalition is a community organization based in New Bern, North Carolina, whose mission is to raise public awareness of environmental issues and environmental justice issues by engaging citizens in meaningful community action. Tonight, we'll be having a panel discussion that will be looking at the 2021 environmental policies of the Biden and Cooper administrations. This program is being recorded and will be available via the CNC website and Twitter and Facebook sites. We are very fortunate to have three excellent panelists and others for moral support: Cassie Gavin, Penny Hooper, and Ken Brame, who will share presentations and discuss policies. The CNCR board members will be joining the discussion. And we will be taking questions via the chat box. A little housekeeping there for a moment. So next, I'd like to introduce the panelists. Cassie Gavin. Cassie is the Senior Director of Government Relations for the North Carolina Sierra Club. She's an attorney and studied at UNC School of Law. She represents the Sierra Club at the North Carolina General Assembly and works with the media and volunteers. Cassie previously worked in land conservation at the North Carolina Coastal Land Trust in Wilmington. In her free time, Cassie enjoys kayaking. Penny Hooper. Penny served as the Sustainability Committee Chair and lead biology instructor at Carteret Community College until her retirement in 2010. She has volunteered on the advisory committee of the North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light since 2006. Since 2016, she has served on the North Carolina Sierra Club Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Committee and the Conservation Committee. She was one of the founding members of the Croatan Sierra Club group and currently serves as the executive committee and as the Conservation Committee Chair. She also serves on the statewide No Drill Coalition, which is a collaborative of environmental and groups working to stop offshore drilling and seismic blasting. I like to refer to Penny as the ultimate supporter and activist. Ken Brame. His accomplishments include member of the National Sierra Club Political Committee for over 10 years and its chair for 8 years. He has been a member of the North Carolina ExCom for 4 years, chair of the North Carolina Political Committee for over 8 years, chair of the Western North Carolina Sierra Club Group Political Committee for over 10 years. He's a volunteer lobbyist for city, county, and local state legislative elected officials. Major accomplishments were the adoption of an aggressive 100% renewable energy goal for Buncombe County and the city of Asheville. He has also worked with the Beyond Coal campaign to get agreement to shut down local coal-powered electric plants. I personally feel we're in the midst of Sierra Club and environmental action royalty. So with that, we are going to move on to Cassie's presentation.
Thank you, Don, for inviting me and other Sierra Club folks. I have a presentation that I'll share in a moment, but just by way of introduction, he introduced me, but I grew up in North Carolina. I was born in Siler City, Chatham County, and grew up out by Jordan Lake. And so, love the environment from when I was a kid and definitely take that into my work today. So water quality is really important to me, and clean energy is a big deal, of course, if we're going to address climate change. So I'm going to talk as best I can about some of Biden's environmental priorities, although I am not a federal lobbyist, so I may not be able to answer all questions on that level. And then I can talk about Cooper's environmental policies and a little bit about some expectations about the North Carolina legislature. So I'll share my screen now. Okay. Hope everyone can see that.
Yep.
Great. So first of all, the Biden administration has come in with really big promises about what they hope to do on the environment, as we've all heard. this is wonderful because, it's a big change from what we've seen under Trump. Much of what he wants to do, he should be able to do quickly, but there's a lot of other things that he'll need Congress's support to do. So I'm going to primarily focus on what he can do as the head of the executive branch. And then there's a lot more that can be done if he can get the support of Congress, which, given the Georgia race, is possible, but not a sure thing. So these are some examples of the climate change policies that are planned and that the Biden administration can move forward with right away. Rulemaking takes a little bit longer, but executive orders, as you may have heard in the news, can be done on day one, and they were. So I've been really pleased with the pace and the boldness of the environmental actions that he's taken so far. So these are just some examples of things that the Biden administration is doing right away, integrating the social cost of carbon into all the agency considerations. That sounds very bureaucratic, but it's actually really important. If every rule you look at and every action you look at, you're thinking about what are the climate change impacts of that? What is it going to cost? So that's really important. Also, looking at reviewing and replacing rules for coal plants. You may have heard that the terrible Trump era rule that was proposed to replace the good Obama era Clean Power Plan was recently ruled to not be workable by a court. So that really greases the wheels for Biden administration to come in and propose a new rule. Experts don't think that the administration will try to bring back exactly the Clean Power Plan as it was proposed under Obama, because a lot has changed since then. So there will probably be a brand new rule proposed that could be similar or maybe very different. The administration plans to address oil and gas leakage. That's great because you may know that methane, which leaks from natural gas, is a very potent greenhouse gas and has a big impact on climate change. He is planning on addressing airplane greenhouse gas emissions, and one of the big ones is vehicle fuel economy standards. The Trump administration had planned on actually rolling back fuel efficiency standards, which would have made our cars burn more gas and would have cost more money. So even the car companies were not all on board with that, which is wild because it would be cheaper for them to build more gas guzzlers. But the Biden administration plans to reverse that move and go back to improving fuel economy standards over time. So that's a good move. Really big picture, I thought I'd share a list of some things that we can expect the Biden administration to do and that he has started doing already. One of the big ones is appointing leaders who are diverse and who believe in climate change and science and transparency. An example was the nomination of Michael Regan, our North Carolina Secretary of the Environment. He's been nominated to lead the EPA, and he's been very strong on environmental justice and clean energy, leading Governor Cooper's clean energy plan. So I think he'll be a good leader at EPA. And he knows how to come in after an anti-science administration and turn things around, because that's what he had to do after the McCrory administration here in North Carolina. So I actually think that was a big part of why he has been nominated. And there's other great leaders nominated for other agencies as well. And further down beneath the heads, there's a lot of new people coming in that have really strong climate change background on science and policy. Some of who we know and who are from North Carolina. So that's exciting. The Biden administration can also halt oil and gas leases on public land. I looked this up and it has been done. So that is one of the early things that we've seen we're very happy about. He can set limits on methane pollution from fracking, very important. Do a lot of more conservation of land for biodiversity. The executive branch has that power to designate and protect some lands. And improve efficiency standards, invest in climate resilient infrastructure. Anything that says invest is going to rely somewhat on Congress, because of course, Congress controls the purse strings. So when we see that word, we know that the administration may have big plans, but that's contingent upon support. And then addressing racial justice and environmental justice, there was a big move today. I was pleased to see the Biden administration move forward on something on racial justice, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute. And then environmental justice is woven throughout all of his environmental platforms and plans. So it's really great to see, the leader of the Democratic Party talk about this stuff. That means he's setting the bar for the party. That means other Democrats really shouldn't go below that. So it's really setting a new high bar on all of this. I did some screenshots because I wanted to let people know that you can look up all of these plans online, and they're really pretty full of information. So the Biden plan for clean energy and environmental justice, it's all there online. You can Google it, you can read it. Very ambitious. There's also a plan called Secure Environmental Justice and Equitable Economic Opportunity. A mouthful, but has a lot of great ideas in it as well, and a lot of things that I hadn't necessarily thought about, but that make a lot of sense and will definitely move us forward on being able to count on the federal government to use data and science in their decision making instead of anti-science, which is what we have seen. The Biden administration can also move forward on revoking a lot of the Trump environmental rollbacks, some of which I mentioned, but there are way too many to mention here, literally over 100. So the Biden administration, they have their list of those and they will move quickly on what they can. Agency rulemaking could take a number of years. So there will be some things that will go a lot slower, but they'll begin moving forward on those when they can. And then a little bit more on what Biden has done already. The big deal on climate change, of course, was the United States rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement. So that notification has been sent, and we can mark February 17th on our calendars as the day that the US will officially be back part of the world as far as working together to address climate change. And I put that picture up there because environmentalists have been really working for that for all these years under Trump, and I know a lot of folks are very excited about that aspect. The Biden administration also moved really fast to revoke a key permit for a Keystone pipeline. That means it's very unlikely to go forward. Like there's a small chance the permit decision could be challenged, but everything I've read, experts think it's basically a done deal because of that permit. So that's great news. And then the racial equity policy I learned about today was that Biden signed a series of executive actions on equity policy and prison reform. That's great. Not directly environmental, but environmental justice and racial justice are intertwined. And so it's great to see them moving on all of that. On the prison reform, the federal government's no longer going to work with private prisons. So thought that was also a positive move. Then I thought I'd mention some of the clean transportation opportunities that I have understand that the Biden administration supports and that they're going to move forward on as much as possible. That includes electrifying the government auto fleets, investing in transportation electrification, both at the government level and then as much as possible through the states as well. So that's going to cost money, but it's good to have that support at the federal level. Infrastructure, that means, bike lanes, sidewalks, greenways, all of that kind of stuff that can add to a community and make life safer and more enjoyable. I know during COVID, we've all enjoyed getting outside, walking, biking more. You can't even buy a bicycle now, I hear they're all sold out. So I think that's very needed. And then there is money already going to some states and local governments for EV buses and public transportation. So that's good. And both in North Carolina and at the federal level, there are going to be investments in expanding EV charging infrastructure. Basically, got to have the charging if you want to electrify the auto fleet. So that's what I have on Biden. It's a lot. And then on Cooper, he's really been a leader in environmental policy since he's been the governor, and now he's been elected to his second term. So we expect to see more of the same and to see him carry through on the plans that he's set forward so far. And he'll have to find another environmental secretary of our Department of Environmental Quality to help him move forward, since Michael Regan will be going up to DC. But we think he can find another good person here in North Carolina to lead the way. I noted here a couple of his major environmental policy initiatives. Definitely his Executive Order 80 on climate change has been a major one. He's moved North Carolina forward on climate policy more than any other governor, for sure. The Clean Energy Plan is out, and now there's basically a lot of policy work going on around that to really get nitty gritty into what the state needs to do exactly to address climate change. Executive Order 80 set a statewide goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but of course, the executive branch doesn't control the entire state. So it calls on private companies and the legislature to do what they can do on climate change as well. Given the political reality, I don't expect the legislature to step forward on that, but local governments are stepping forward, and a lot of private companies are as well. And then the other Cooper priority that I have seen is holding polluters accountable, and that's coordination between the Department of Environment and the Attorney General's office. We've seen them really holding Chemours accountable for the GenX pollution of the Cape Fear River. In fact, today there was a new notice of violation issued to Chemours, which those notices are actually pretty rare. So Chemours hasn't been following through with the settlement to clean up the GenX pollution. So that's kind of one of the final acts of Michael Regan before he leaves. And then, of course, you may have seen the Duke Energy coal ash settlement this week that Sierra Club was involved in, along with the Attorney General and Duke Energy, that'll save ratepayers over $1 billion on coal ash cleanup. So that's been a priority of the Cooper administration, not just the coal ash rate case, but also the settlement between the Department of Environment and Duke Energy to require all of the coal ash pits to be excavated and removed to line storage. And that's part of why he won election, because McCrory was really bad on coal ash cleanup, and voters noticed. And I wanted to share the Clean Energy Plan. You can look up, it's on the Department of Environmental Quality website. This is the cover. It's a big book full of lots of ideas for all levels of government. And the Sierra Club participated in the stakeholder process, as did many other groups, environmental and justice. So that work is still continuing. And these are some of the policies that are kind of set out in the Clean Energy Plan. Like I said, some of these would require statute and legislation, which means they are unlikely to happen this year or next year, but maybe if there's political change, you might see more bold clean energy action at the legislature. There is a possibility that there may be a bipartisan energy bill this year or next year. And if there was one, I would expect it to probably have performance-based rate making in it at least, which would require the utility to do better on things like energy efficiency and to be paid for it. And this is a picture of Michael Regan and Cooper signing the Executive Order 80. I also wanted to mention on offshore wind, the governor's been a leader lately. Just in October, he worked out an agreement with Virginia governor and Maryland governor to do a collaboration between the states to promote offshore wind. And given a lot of y'all are at the coast, you probably know that North Carolina has some of the best offshore wind resources in the United States. So there's a lot of potential there. The Cooper administration is also doing a supply chain study that should be out soon about what the wind industry could contribute to North Carolina economy, because there's already a lot of companies that make wind energy parts here in North Carolina. And then I thought I would mention some legislative opportunities that we do see potentially this year and next year. There is still bipartisan interest in doing something on toxics, addressing PFAS, forever chemical contamination, looking at Comores and Gen X. Right now, there's discussion about another bill to ban firefighting foam, which has toxic chemicals in it and has led to pollution in Greensboro. So I do expect there to be a bill about that or multiple bills about those issues. And then on clean energy, if there is a bill, I think there will be aspects of it that we would support, including fixing our community solar program that is in existence but hasn't been effective yet. And then, like I said, performance-based rate making, energy efficiency, and maybe something to help businesses transition to solar and add energy efficiency called PACE. So I wanted to put a note in for Volunteer Lobby Corps. I'd encourage folks to email me if you're interested in weighing in with your legislators, and I'll give you a heads up and a call for action when there's a need for that. And then if you're more of a want to read an update on Fridays, you can also email me and sign up for that list. So that's all I have for now, and we can move on to the next. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassie. Questions out there? I have a question about the PFSAs. Is there a do federal regulations have to be adjusted in order for North Carolina to make hold them accountable, Chemours accountable?
So the answer is yes and no. It would be wonderful if the EPA would move forward with stronger regulations on PFAS and all kinds of toxic chemicals. That process really hasn't worked in the past years. There's hundreds, thousands of chemicals that should be addressed by the federal government that aren't. But the Department of Environmental Quality here in North Carolina does have some wiggle room to do more than they are doing on toxic chemicals, PFAS specifically. So we have a list of things we've asked them to do, and the legislature as well. But the Department of Environmental Quality is more likely to do it.
I have a question. Can Cassie explain what performance-based rate making is?
Sure. It's the nickname is PBR, which is kind of fun, but it's basically the idea of paying the utility to meet certain performance standards rather than what we do now, which is basically the utilities are incentivized to build a giant power plant that costs a lot of money and recover those costs over a very long period of time and sell as much energy as they possibly can. So, for example, performance-based rate making might say, you have to improve your efficiency by 40% and we'll pay you to get to that target.
Other questions, comments? Benny, yeah, have to unmute.
Great, thank you. No, my question is, I just read about this whole coal ash settlement. Where does the coal ash go?
Sorry, I muted myself and then I had to be unmuted. I jumped the gun on the mute. But the coal ash, it's going to lined storage is the idea, because right now it's in leaking unlined pits next to waterways. And the lined storage is sometimes on site on higher ground. Sometimes they're shipping it to lined landfills. Some of it is being repurposed to be able to be used in concrete. So it depends on the location.
And how long does those, oh, your chance. No, I was going to say, how long are those lined facilities supposed to last? I mean, there must be a limit on how long the liner stays on those sites.
Yeah, it's true. Just like any landfill, liners, have a lifetime. And so, yeah, eventually they would wear out. But The understanding is that it's better to put it in lined storage instead of keeping it leaking into our water. But the best solution of all would be to stop burning coal and stop making coal ash.
Yeah. I think Penny had a question.
I'm not sure if this question would be for Cassie or for Ken. I was wondering how the redistricting is shaping up in North Carolina. How are we moving forward with that?
I'll pitch that to Cassie.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is that the legislature is likely going to wait until late summer or fall to really get going on redistricting because they have to wait for the census numbers to come. And I've also heard they're planning on doing it like they did before with open meetings on video, but none of that is established yet. So that's just a guess.
Okay, thank you.
I would just add that, and again, you have to understand, I'm somewhat suspicious of our North Carolina legislature, but another view of that is they're waiting this fall to do it and still hope to have the primaries in March so that there's less time for court appeals to the what we're afraid would be gerrymandered districts. I was just going to add one other thing on the lines of landfill. Actually, they're double lined, and at least the one in Asheville for our going here also has a, between the two linings, it's got a system that anything that leaks through the first lining is pumped, is captured and recycled back in or taken care of before it gets to the second liner. So it's kind of got several fail safes to try to do it. So, you know, there's no landfill lining that's permanent or totally error proof, but I think they're using the best available technology right now.
Tom, do we have anything in the chat?
Nope, not right now.
No, okay. Any questions? Yeah.
Leela Fay.
Okay, I'm going to unmute you, Leela. Now you have to unmute yourself. Bottom left.
Got you.
There you go.
Thank you. My question is about the census. Because the census didn't undercounted so many people. I haven't heard any recent things about what the national position of Biden is on the census. It's underrepresented lots of people in our county and I think across the United States. And I just wanted, somebody mentioned it and I was interested in an update. I'm off. Thank you.
I do not have an update on that. Perhaps Ken does.
And my understanding is he's currently taking a wait and see attitude to see what actually gets delivered. And the Census Bureau is going through a quality analysis now to try to identify some of those kinds of questions. So I think he's keeping his powder dry until he sees what comes out of that process.
Okay.
I guess there was one question in the chat about how do you figure 40%? I think there was some, can we clear that up?
I just use that as a random number, but it would be great.
Yeah. Anybody else have a question? Penny, would you like to speak about some local issues?
Sure. I'm sorry I don't have slides to present here. Cassie, I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much. Before this meeting, we had a statewide conservation committee meeting that Cynthia and I were both on, and we discussed an issue that is coming to the fore in North Carolina, which is plastics and recycling. And I reported there, and I'll report again here, that the group that I used to belong to, or that I still belong to, the No Drill Coalition, has made an effort to have a subcommittee that's on plastics, and will be uniting several of the big greens across the state Oceana, Surfrider, Sierra Club, Environment North Carolina, Water Keepers, all of those major big greens will be participating in a subcommittee of the No Drill Coalition called the Plastics Subcommittee, which will look at reducing single-use plastics. It may wind up being a similar issue. I know most of you on this call are familiar with the fact that the way the No Drill Coalition worked was by getting resolutions from individual communities and municipalities and counties that said we do not want offshore oil drilling or seismic blasting. And I think that that will probably be the way that we start, which will serve to educate the public about the problems with plastic and plastic, particularly in our oceans, for those of us here on the coast, and microplastics that get into our food chain. So that's a very exciting opportunity from the point of view of our Croatan group of the Sierra Club, because we have a lot of interest in there. I see that Harriet Altman is on this call, and also Suzanne Wheatcraft are the co-chairs of our Plastics and Recycling Subcommittee. And they have decided to start in Beaufort with a friendly mayor, Rhett Newton, who will probably back us up. But we're going to start on a local level. And just as all wonderful grassroots organizations do, build support at that local level and then move on to the state level. And hopefully, and maybe Cassie or Ken could comment on this, hopefully the legislature, if they saw, you know, hundreds of resolutions against single-use plastic, of course it doesn't have any teeth in it, but it may speak to the North Carolina legislature that we're serious about this, and they may allow us to go forward with local bans in areas where it's particularly crucial, like the coastal region. So what do you think, Cassie? Would we have a prayer? She thumbs up. I love it.
She's asking to be unmuted. That's my job.
Yes, yes.
I think it's a great idea, Penny, and thank you for working on it and all these years working on the Offshore Drilling Coalition, and then you won. So now you need something new to focus.
We need something new. That's right. And of course, the deal with plastics is it's another petroleum product. And the recycling is good. It's a wonderful entry point for our people to come into the Sierra Club or the Nature Coalition. It's a great thing to do a cleanup, and everybody gets excited about recycling. And I'm not trying to negate that. I'm just trying to say that what we don't ever produce, we don't ever have to recycle. So better to stop it at the beginning. And the recycling, I think the numbers are around 5% of plastic gets recycled. That's not enough. And the problem's getting much worse. As the wife of a commercial fisherman, which many of you know, and we have a clam lease right in front of our house, and we eat clams a lot, and I'm wondering how much microplastics I'm eating with those clams. It's not a good situation for the ocean. So you will see that coming out in terms of a statewide effort from the Sierra Club and many other organizations that folks in the Carolina Nature Coalition may be a part of, including Oceana and Environment NC, Surfriders, Water Keepers, all of those folks. We all recognize there's a need.
Cassie, I've got a follow-up question to Penny's question. If local governments were to pass a plastics ban, was that something that even if the legislature tried to override that Governor Cooper could veto, or would that fall under the local bills that he can't veto?
It depends, Ken. It really depends. Referencing, years ago, the legislature did repeal the Outer Banks plastic bag ban that was in place unfortunately. We fought really hard against that, but the Retail Merchants Association that represents grocery stores was against the plastic bag ban, so we lost. But these days, if the legislature did pass a bill to repeal a local ordinance, it would depend if it was a local bill, Ken, or if they stuck it in some other bill. And, you know, if it's another bill with a bunch of other things, the governor could veto it. So just depends.
Mhm. And I might add that for those of us in District 3, our local representative at the North Carolina legislature is Pat McElraft. And I would encourage you to develop a relationship with her and let her know how you feel. She lives in Emerald Isle and in a gated community. And when we were talking about this earlier, her idea was just put more trash cans on the beach. So that was when we were fighting the ban the bag repeal. So we'll see what she has to say. But as a local representative, I want to encourage each of you to develop those relationships with your representatives and to speak out either through email or a phone call or signing on to a petition. All of it makes a difference. Yep. Thank you.
Well, Cassie, I have another question. I didn't hear anything about wood pellets at all in this presentation. Can you fill us in where we are on those permits and the general status?
Sure. Yeah, that's a priority of Sierra Club, but I wouldn't say it's a priority of the administration. So that's why I didn't include it. But we are working against wood pellets, against that industry, primarily because it means thousands of acres of forest are being cut down in North Carolina and all across the South. And those forests are our biggest carbon sink to address climate change that we really have. And once you burn them, of course, they release emissions. If folks are not familiar with the background, the company Enviva that was mentioned has a number of factories in North Carolina where the wood pellets are made with our forests and then shipped overseas to be burned as clean energy. So that's a perverse situation. But what we're seeking is for the governor to take as much action as is possible at the executive branch level to look at the climate and environmental justice impacts of that and do what they can with permitting. Now, what would be ideal is if the legislature were to step in, but we would not anticipate this legislature to do anything helpful on that. And then the good thing that the has done on wood pellets is that in the clean energy plan, it does say that they are not considered clean energy.
No.
That's a start. That's a start anyway.
Yeah.
Yes, Leela.
Maybe am I still unmuted?
Nope, you're good.
Okay. What about all the plastic that's being worn by all the medical people everywhere? I mean, tons and tons of this. Is it possible plastic bags can be redone? What about all of this plastic? I mean, I see it and I never hear it talked about. So I'm curious, is that possible? Has anybody been down that road?
Well, I think that the situation is that we're never going to really get rid of all plastic. I mean, I think about the folks who were on kidney dialysis, and I don't want anybody using anything but brand new plastic for those folks, or something that is, sterilized properly. But so the medical waste is huge, especially in the pandemic. And I don't think we've even come close to addressing it yet.
Okay.
I would just add that there's several things I think happening during the pandemic that are certainly some good things, and the fossil fuel usage is down on a temporary basis. But there's also some things, and one you mentioned, the plastic use. There's also a lot of styrofoam and plastic being used for takeout for restaurants right now. And that's a dilemma because in many cases, that takeout is the only thing keeping those restaurants from closing and going out of business. So it's kind of but I'm much more, I guess maybe certainly concerned, but less concerned about the temporary things like this than I am about the long-term plastic bags, single-use plastics that are happening every day and into the future as far as the eye can see if we don't do something. And I really think that's where we need to be focusing our time and attention to try to deal with those long-term impacts.
So Ralph, I see you're on the call. Do you have any thoughts, questions at all? And I have to unmute you.
Not at the moment.
Okay?
Participating in Penny's meeting in 2 days.
Yes, yes, the 28th, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ralph. I hope you can come. I just wanted to say one more thing about the wood pellet issue. If you just look at it surface level and don't consider the justice aspects, environmental justice aspects of it, you know, you kind of say, what's wrong with taking hog feces and turning them into methane? And the situation has to be considered in the community that is being most affected by this. I think that 20 years ago, we passed legislation in North Carolina that said that we would discontinue open pits and the method of storing waste from the hog farms that we're currently using. And the position of the communities where this is happening is that nothing has happened, nothing has changed. And now they want to put in 30 miles of pipeline to carry this methane from one place to another. And it's just a cumulative effect on a community, on lots of communities where the CAFOs are located, that is destructive and harmful. And, you know, at some point in time, they have a right to say no more. And this is their point in time. So if people talk to you about that and say, what's wrong with it, explain the justice issue. People don't make that relationship. Am I right about that, Cassie?
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the biogas from hog CAFOs issue. It's a big one in environmental justice in North Carolina right now. And everything Penny said is correct. And, you know, Sierra Club's guidance on biogas is like, sure, it can be done right on a farm that's doing it right, that's also addressing water and air pollution at its source and, you know, doing all of the other good things that it can do for sustainability. But that is not what's proposed in North Carolina right now. There are no new water and air protections being proposed along with it. It's basically just, let's keep things the same way and then add some pipelines.
There was one comment from someone that talked about we have to get plastic out of the packaging. No excuse. I feel like this is the way to start.
Mm-hmm. I agree, Tom.
I think, you know, personally, you know, I used to live in Europe, and it was basically a very strict regulation in Europe. You have to be, as a manufacturer of consumer goods, you have to follow really strict guidelines in terms of packaging. Otherwise, you get fined big time.
Yeah, there's a lot of education we have to do of folks who just think this is the only way it can happen. You know, who really needs a red pepper all wrapped up in plastic and styrofoam? I don't want it.
Yeah, right. Ed, you have a question?
I was going to say something was, again, back to plastics, which we're talking about in Europe. I don't know if it was Germany or one of the other major countries in this world has put a ban on single-use plastic. You know, I think it really, and I don't know if Biden has said anything yet, or, I mean, it's only his first week, and EPA coming in. But it's really important that it starts from the top down. We can't say, well, we're going to ban it this town or that town. I mean, in many countries, Uganda, other places, I think Kenya as well, they just said it's banned.
Well, might I suggest that it comes from both directions? And wherever you are determines where you begin. And in North Carolina, it's not going to come from our state legislature. So because it won't come from that top down, let's do what we do best. We are a wonderful grassroots organization, and we can start at that level and, meet them in the middle. It's my theory.
I'm just gonna jump in and add that one of the things I think we're all gonna have to be aware of is what's possible and what's not. I think everybody is very excited about having Biden as our president, and certainly replacing the person he replaced is even more exciting. And there are some things we're going to see very quickly with executive orders, and that are going to happen very quickly, and they can certainly reverse a lot of what the Trump administration did. Other things like the rulemaking, as Cassie pointed out, are going to take months or potentially years to reverse. But the good news is it would also take a hostile administration in the future months or years to reverse those back if it were to happen. I think we also need to be aware that we were very good at challenging a lot of what Trump did in the courts and winning a lot of those. A lot of our lawsuits we won. But I think we also need to be aware that many of the good things he's going to do are going to be challenged in the courts by the other side to try to tie him up and delay him. For example, we know with President Obama's Clean Power Plan never went into effect because of legal challenges. So I think we need to be realistic and understand that as much as we want everything to happen tomorrow, it's not. The other challenge is I think, again, we're all excited to have a theoretical majority in the US Senate, but I think we also have to recognize that anything we pass in the legislative standpoint, even if they did away with the filibuster, would require the senator from West Virginia, one of the biggest coal states in the country, and who's not going to vote for anything that's going to damage the coal industry, to get on board, or we would have to find enough Republicans. And realistically, we probably would have to find 11 Republicans to get past a filibuster for most new legislations. So there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done, particularly in those states that have a Republican senator, like we've got 2 of them, that we should be putting pressure on. One's not running for re-election, but that also frees him to be a little bit more open to doing some things. The other one doesn't run again for 6 years, so maybe he could be convinced to do a few things. They both supported the conservation funding bill that we got passed last time. So things are possible. It may not be the home runs, but if we can get enough singles together with steps forward, Manchin in West Virginia, while he will oppose anything that hurts coal industry, I think he is maybe not at all opposed to hurting the oil and gas industry, since that competes with coal. And he's got a lot of out of work miners that could certainly benefit from some clean energy initiatives and job programs in West Virginia. So I think those are just opportunities we all have to kind of think about how we can move forward. But I think, we have a lot of opportunities, but we need to be realistic and not expect a miracle overnight, because it's going to take a while to make progress. And a lot will depend on the election in 2022 or in 2024. So this is a longer term game, but we need to be aware of that. I want to just add one last thing, which is some really good news. I know the last 4 years, none of us feel like there was any good news other than Governor Cooper's Executive Order 80, but there's a lot of exciting things happening at the local level. And Cassie, you can correct me here, we have now 27 or 28 local governments that have passed carbon reduction goals. Some of them are 100% renewables, some are being carbon free by 2050, some are more aggressive, but 28, or is that right, Cassie? Is 28 or 27? 28 local governments have passed carbon reduction goals and are actively working towards that. And we've got a hostile regulatory environment in North Carolina, which makes it more difficult for them. And certainly the legislature is not helping. And Duke's stranglehold on energy really is an impediment to that. But there's still really opportunities, and there's a lot of excitement and efforts going on at the local level that I think can make a difference. And so those are things to be excited about, and to look at other communities that might be willing to expand that and get up to 40 or 50 or whatever the number we can eventually get to. So, I mean, Franklin, North Carolina, which is one of the most conservative counties in the state, has passed a carbon reduction goal. So if it can happen in Franklin, North Carolina, it can happen in a lot of places. So we just need to figure out how we can make that happen. So, I'm a strong believer in grassroots and local level. That's where grassroots makes a difference. City council members, county commissioners are susceptible to their own constituents asking for things and showing up. I'll throw out one example of that happened. We've been in Western North Carolina near the Asheville area. We're fighting a big mega development of 1,500 apartments and office buildings and all kinds of things on 92 acres. That's on sloping, mature wooded forest overlooking, flowing down into the French Broad River. And we're fighting that. And it was a slam dunk. The developer the owner is a good friend of the mayor of the small town of Woodfin, which is a small suburb of 7,000 or 8,000 people next to Asheville. And they had never had more than 10 people show up at a city council or commission meeting before. We had over 100 people, and actually they had a 100-person limit on their Zoom call. And we had a lot of people that couldn't get on, and people spoke for 2 hours opposing it. And they did not that night approve the annexation, which was key to the project. And they delayed the hearing that was going to approve the conditional use permit. Again, we haven't won, but it was a great example of getting people in neighborhoods and in small conservative areas. If enough citizens show up and speak, it can make a difference, particularly if they're residents of that particular area. So I'll put away my soapbox, but I'm a strong believer, and you guys, Penny, and you guys have done a great job grassroots organizing out there, but it can make a difference and pay off.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions? Well, I thought Ken had a great wrap up to our panel discussion here. Thank you very much. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. It's been great. Please let people know this in a couple of days, this panel discussion will be on the CNC website, carolinanaturecoalition.org, as well as the Twitter and Facebook. So once again, thank you very much. And I guess, Penny, we'll see you Thursday night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity to be part of your discussion.
Yes, thank you, Ken. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.